Chuck Norris couldn't or wouldn't do. The 86-year-old, long deemed invincible, has died suddenly, leaving his legion of fans in shock.
9 days before his death, an 86-year-old man posted a video of himself sparring in the Hawaiian sun. "I don't age. I level up," he wrote underneath it. 9 days later, the man who had survived a dozen internet death hoaxes over the years was actually gone, and what he left behind would leave his own family in tears for reasons that had nothing to do with money. On March 19, 2026, Chuck Norris suffered a medical emergency on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, where he had a home on the North Shore that he and his wife Gina had loved for years. He was hospitalized on Wednesday, and by Thursday morning he was gone. He was 86 years old. His family's statement, posted to Instagram early that Friday, did not give a cause of death. It asked for privacy. But one line in that statement stood out above the rest: "Thank you for loving him with us." Not thank you for watching his movies. Not thank you for the ratings or the box office. Thank you for loving him. That single sentence tells you almost everything you need to know about the man underneath the roundhouse kicks. This was not the first time the internet had declared Chuck Norris dead. False reports had circulated for years, claiming he died in a car accident, succumbed to COVID, or passed quietly in a hospital bed. Each time, he was very much alive, amused by his own mythology. So when the real statement finally came, it took a moment for the world to process that this one was true. Tributes poured in almost immediately. Political figures called him a tough, good man. The network that had once fought him in court over tens of millions of dollars issued a warm public statement. Hollywood mourned a man who had spent much of his career quietly pushing back against it. And then came the question every entertainment outlet wanted answered: what did he actually leave behind? The widely cited figure, tracked by celebrity net worth and repeated across financial and entertainment coverage, puts his estate at approximately $70 million. But a number like that tells you almost nothing on its own. The real story is in how it was built, who is set to inherit it, and the legal fight he waged for years against one of the biggest networks in television just to get what his contract actually promised him. His estate includes the Lone Wolf Ranch outside Navasota, Texas, roughly 1,000 acres that became the family's full-time home once Chuck stepped back from Hollywood around 2012. It includes the Kauai property where he died, a coastal home worth an estimated $7 million. It includes Seaforce Bottling Company, a water business the family built after an unexpected discovery on their own land. And it includes decades of royalties, endorsement income, and syndication payments from a television show that, on paper, should never have survived its first season. No public will has surfaced in the days since his death. Under Texas community property law, a surviving spouse is generally entitled to half of the marital estate by default, which means Gina O'Kelly is positioned to inherit a substantial share, with the remainder passing to his children. He had 5 of them, across 2 marriages and 1 relationship that stayed hidden from public view for close to 3 decades. What's already clear is that Gina holds a controlling 51% stake in Seaforce as its CEO, which means the water business stays firmly in her hands no matter how the rest of the estate is eventually divided. To understand how a karate instructor from a broken home ended up with a fortune like this, you have to go back to Ryan, Oklahoma, where a painfully shy boy named Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940. He arrived with dangerously low oxygen levels, the kind of complicated birth that doctors at the time watched closely. His mother, Wilma, worked constantly to hold the family together. His father was a World War II veteran who came home changed by the war and struggled with drinking, disappearing for long stretches at a time. By his own account years later, the house felt calmer when his father was gone and tense when he was home. The family moved from Oklahoma to Kansas to California chasing work, and Chuck graduated high school in 1958 as, in his own words, an unremarkable and non-athletic teenager who had never really succeeded at anything difficult. That same year, he enlisted in the Air Force and married his high school girlfriend, Diane Holchek. He was sent to South Korea, and it was there that everything changed. He wandered into a martial arts class on base almost by accident and became consumed by it, training for hours nearly every night under a Korean instructor. Within roughly a year, he had earned his black belt, and he later described that accomplishment as the first time in his life he had done something genuinely hard entirely on his own. That feeling, more than any single fight or film role, is arguably the real engine behind everything that came after. Once discharged, he opened a karate school, then a chain of them across Southern California, eventually training celebrities and becoming a multiple-time national karate champion. It was at a tournament that Bruce Lee first noticed him. The two trained together for years and became close friends, and it was Lee who eventually gave Chuck his breakthrough, casting him as the villain in the climactic fight of The Way of the Dragon, a scene shot inside Rome's Colosseum despite the production never actually receiving official permission to film there. The movie was made on a tiny budget and went on to earn well over $100 million worldwide. Chuck became famous, ironically, for losing on screen to a man he always described as the greatest martial artist he ever knew. After Lee's sudden death in 1973, Chuck stayed close to the family, spending evenings with Lee's widow and young son, sharing stories about the father the boy was growing up without. It was another student, Steve McQueen, who eventually convinced Chuck to take acting seriously, telling him directly that he had the presence and simply needed to learn the craft. Chuck enrolled in acting classes and began picking up small roles, earning just a few $1,000s for his first credited part. When no studio would distribute one of his early features, he and his producers rented out theaters themselves rather than let the film disappear. It worked. Made for roughly $1 million, that film reportedly brought in close to $18 million, and after that, Hollywood couldn't ignore him. Through the late 70s and into the 80s, he built a steady run of action films, developing the stoic, no-nonsense screen persona that would eventually define him in the public imagination for the rest of his life. By the early 90s he had appeared in more than 20 films, built a loyal audience, and earned real money, but he still hadn't found the project that would turn him from a working action star into a permanent piece of American pop culture. That project turned out to be television, not film. Walker, Texas Ranger premiered on CBS in April 1993 and nearly collapsed before it began. The original production company went bankrupt after only a few episodes were finished. CBS was reportedly ready to cancel the show entirely until the premiere ratings came in far stronger than expected, and new financial partners stepped in to keep it alive. What followed was 9 seasons and 203 episodes, one of the first primetime dramas filmed entirely in Texas. Chuck controlled much of the creative direction through his own production company, insisted on the kind of moral, faith-driven storylines he wanted his name attached to, and even performed the theme song himself. His contract reportedly paid him $375,000 per episode plus a share of total profits, and syndication turned the show into a genuinely global product, airing in more than 100 countries and generating an estimated $692 million in total franchise revenue over the years. That last figure is where the story turns into a real legal fight. In 2019, Norris sued CBS and Sony, alleging the networks owed him tens of millions of dollars in unpaid profit participation, arguing they had restructured streaming and distribution deals in a way that avoided triggering the payments his contract entitled him to. The case worked its way through the courts for years before finally settling in 2023 for an undisclosed amount. Whatever that settlement was worth is now folded into the estate his family is inheriting today, a quiet reminder that even a beloved American icon sometimes has to go to court to collect what is owed. Beyond film and television, Chuck built a genuinely diversified fortune. His endorsement partnership for the Total Gym home fitness machine ran for close to 3 decades and sold millions of units worldwide, becoming one of the longest-running celebrity fitness partnerships in television history. Then there's Lone Wolf Ranch itself, which became far more than a home. Workers drilling for water on the property in the early 2010s struck an ancient underground aquifer, a discovery that eventually led Chuck and Gina to launch Seaforce Bottling Company. Today the water is sold across dozens of states, and a portion of every bottle sold supports Kickstart Kids, the martial arts nonprofit Chuck founded in 1990 to teach discipline and confidence to at-risk students, a program that has now reached well over 100,000 young people across Texas. By most accounts, including his own, it was the achievement he was proudest of, more than any film or television role. He rarely spoke about the program the way he spoke about his movies, without the jokes or the mythology, just a quiet insistence that discipline learned young could change the direction of a life the way it had once changed his. But behind the public image of a devout, disciplined family man was a story Chuck kept private for almost 30 years. In 1962, while stationed in California awaiting discharge, he began a brief relationship with a woman named Johanna without telling her he was already married. She became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, Dina, in early 1963. When Johanna later discovered Chuck was married, she raised Dina entirely on her own and eventually told her the truth as a teenager, along with a clear instruction: do not reach out to him. For 26 years, Dina carried the name of a father she had never met. Everything changed after Chuck's divorce from Diane became public in 1989. 2 years later, Dina wrote him a letter and eventually came to meet him in person. In his memoir, Chuck described the moment he saw her standing in his living room and knowing instantly, without any test, that she was his daughter. He later wrote one of the more widely quoted lines of his life, that there may be illegitimate parents in the world, and he was one of them, but there are no illegitimate children. Dina was fully welcomed into the family from that point forward, and by all accounts remained close to her father for the rest of his life. In total, Chuck had 5 children. Mike became a filmmaker. Eric built a respected career as a Hollywood stunt coordinator. The twins, Dakota and Danielle, born in 2001 to Chuck and Gina, grew up on the Texas ranch. And Dina, the daughter he spent nearly 3 decades not knowing, became proof that the man behind the action hero image was more complicated and more human than the legend ever let on. The family also endured genuine hardship in Chuck's final years, hardship that had nothing to do with fame. In late 2012, Gina underwent a series of MRI scans using a gadolinium-based contrast dye, a substance meant to pass through the body harmlessly within hours. In her case, it didn't. She described intense, burning symptoms that escalated over time into tremors, kidney complications, and severe muscle deterioration, while doctors ruled out one serious illness after another without finding an answer. Convinced the contrast dye itself was the cause, Chuck arranged for her to be flown across the country for specialized treatment, and testing eventually confirmed unusually high levels of the metal in her system. He has said publicly that he stepped back from his acting career for years to be there for her recovery. In 2017, the couple filed a lawsuit against a group of pharmaceutical companies over the contrast agents. Both later testified before a federal advisory panel that reviewed safety warnings on the drugs. The lawsuit was ultimately withdrawn without a settlement in 2020, but the broader safety conversation it helped fuel continued well beyond the courtroom. That same devotion, the version of Chuck Norris that slept beside a hospital bed for months and flew his wife across the world looking for answers, is the version his family wanted people to remember when they wrote "Thank you for loving him." Not the internet meme. Not the roundhouse kick. The husband, the father, and eventually the grandfather who spent his final years on a Texas ranch, largely out of the spotlight, running a water company with his wife and funding a youth program he considered his real legacy. Inevitably, his death also reopened an old debate. Chuck was outspoken about his Christian faith, describing it publicly as the single most important part of his identity, more than the movies or the martial arts titles ever were. He was a longtime supporter of the National Rifle Association and spent years writing a syndicated political column. His endorsement of Mike Huckabee ahead of a Republican primary years earlier had been credited with real influence at the time, and he later backed Donald Trump as well. In the days after his passing, commentary emerged from some entertainment outlets questioning how heavily those political stances should factor into how he's remembered, and the reaction to that framing was immediate and, for many longtime fans, unwelcome. That argument isn't new, and it isn't likely to resolve quickly. But the fortune itself, the ranch, the water company, the decades of royalties, and the settlement he fought years in court to secure, is real, and it's being divided right now among the people who actually knew him, not the internet legend built around him. So when his family asked the world to thank them for loving him rather than simply for watching him, that request wasn't really about money at all. It was a reminder that behind $70 million and 30 years of movie mythology was a man who spent his final years exactly where he wanted to be. At home, with the people he loved, still leveling up until the very end. What do you think Chuck Norris's real legacy should be, the movies, the myth, or the man his family described? Let us know in the comments below.